The old goat was ramming his bloody head into the church's basement door, screaming like he was trying to warn the dead. Behind that rusted steel, something was moving, something human. When the sheriff finally opened it, even he staggered back in horror. But what they found next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The first time Tessa Marsh noticed the goat staring, she laughed. It was 6:13 a.m., the sun just breaking over the frost-bitten fields of Pine Hollow, and Amos, her ornery, one-eared Nubian, had escaped the pen again. She spotted him standing at the edge of the churchyard, stock still, ears pricked toward the squat brick chapel across the field. More specifically, toward the side entrance, a set of rust-stained double doors that led down into the basement of Pine Hollow First Baptist. The way he stood there, eyes locked like a hunting dog, unnerved her enough to yell, "Amos, get your ragged butt back here before I sell you to that hipster butcher in Charleston." But he didn't move, not at first. Only after she stomped toward him did he reluctantly turn, hooves crunching on the frosted grass, and shuffle back to the fence line, pausing once to look back, still watching that door. That should have been the end of it. Just another weird goat thing. But then it happened again, and again, and again. By the fifth morning, it wasn't funny anymore. Every day like clockwork, Amos slipped out of the pen and made his way to the same spot. No sniffing, no wandering. He walked straight to the church like he had a standing appointment. And he stared, not at the steeple or the stained glass windows, but at those damp, decaying basement doors. When she tried tying him, he fought the rope until his neck was raw. When she reinforced the fencing, he leapt over it. Once he bit her son Jesse when the boy tried to drag him back by the horn. By the second week, he started making noise. It wasn't bleeding, it was deeper, wilder, a hoarse, rhythmic sound that came in gasping bursts like something was choking on its own panic. Every time he saw those doors, Amos started shrieking like he was watching something die behind them. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Gill from the trailer park called one morning to ask if a coyote was loose. Mr. Travis from the feed store offered to put Amos down, free of charge, because some animals just lose their minds when winter sets in. But Amos wasn't sick. His appetite was fine, his coat was glossy, his eyes were too clear, and that's what got under Tessa's skin the most. The intelligence behind those eyes. The certainty. She couldn't explain it, but he knew something. It was in the way he stood when Pastor Gerald passed by. One Sunday after service, the pastor walked across the gravel lot, waving to everyone with that familiar, affable warmth, square-shouldered in his worn black suit, his white Bible tucked under his arm like a badge of honor. Tessa was halfway across the lawn trying to coax Amos back with a slice of apple. As Gerald neared the basement door, Amos went still. He didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He just stared at the man like he was trying to bore a hole through his soul. And that's when something shifted in the pastor's expression. Just for a second. A flicker of tension in the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. Then gone. Back to that gentle smile. "He's a curious one, that goat," Gerald chuckled, brushing a speck of dust off his slacks. "Animals always pick up on spiritual residue. Old churches like this? Full of it." Tessa nodded, but her skin prickled. It wasn't what he said. It was how easily he said it, like he'd practiced the line. She watched him walk into the church, his back stiff, never once glancing behind him. Amos let out a final, guttural growl. Then he sat down, facing the door, and refused to move. The breaking point came on a Monday. It was still dark when Tessa stepped onto the porch, expecting to find frost, silence, maybe the occasional hoot from the woods beyond Route 6. Instead, she heard banging. Metal. Rhythmic. Violent. She followed the sound barefoot across the yard, heart thumping harder with every step. As she cleared the tree line separating her land from the church, she froze. There was Amos in the gravel lot, slamming his skull into the basement doors. The old goat's ribs heaved with each impact. Blood smeared the rusted hinges. His left horn had snapped off at the base, a raw pulp of pink exposed to the cold. He struck again, harder this time, and one of the doors shuddered under the blow. "Amos!" Tessa ran, barefoot on gravel, not even feeling it. "Stop! You're gonna kill yourself!" But he didn't stop. He couldn't. His body moved like it belonged to someone else. His hooves scraped. His breath steamed. And the sounds that came out of him weren't natural. They were pleading. It took 3 kicks and a looped rope to drag him back to the fence. He collapsed, trembling, eyes still locked on the basement door. Tessa didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jesse. At 3:47 a.m., her son walked into her room and whispered, "The goat's watching the church again." She pulled him into bed, but even under the covers, even with the heater humming, she felt cold settle in her spine like a hand pressing between her shoulders. The next morning, she drove into town. Sheriff Frank Dunley wasn't the kind of man who rushed to conclusions, or to anything, really. Built like an old cinder block and twice as slow, he'd spent 30 years keeping Pine Hollow quiet by ignoring half of what happened in it. He leaned back in his chair, badge gleaming on his gut, and listened while Tessa poured it all out. Amos, the screaming, the basement, the pastor's strange stillness. Dunley didn't laugh, but he didn't look worried either. "A goat's not probable cause," he muttered. "Neither is a funny look from a preacher." Tessa's voice dropped. "What if there's someone down there?" That did it. Dunley's brow creased. He pulled a worn notepad from his desk drawer and scribbled something. "All right, let's take a look. Just a look." They arrived at the church at 10:06 a.m. Gerald Moore was standing in the foyer with a cup of tea, smiling like he'd expected them. "Sheriff Dunley." He nodded, eyes crinkling at the edges. "And Miss Marsh. What a blessing." Tessa stayed silent. "We've had some concerns," the sheriff said. "Bit of disturbance near the basement." Pastor Gerald's smile didn't falter, but he didn't step aside either. "Old churches make noise. Varmints, wind, creaking boards. The usual. We'd like to take a peek." A beat, then another. "Afraid that's not possible today," Gerald replied, setting his cup down with care. "We're mid-restoration. Dangerous footing down there. Church insurance would have my neck." He held up a hand as if to stop them from arguing. "But if it'll help, I'll give you my assurance. There's nothing down there but dust and old choir robes." Dunley frowned. "You got a key?" Gerald laughed softly. "Not on me. Must have left it at home." The sheriff didn't press, but something in his posture changed, shoulders squared, hand resting on his hip, near the holster. Tessa saw it too. So did Amos. From behind the church, the old goat reappeared, limping, silent now, but walking with purpose. He stopped 10 feet from Gerald, and stared. Gerald didn't look at the goat. He looked at Tessa. Eyes narrow, smile gone. Then he shut the door. The video changed everything. Tessa hadn't planned to record it. She just wanted proof, something real to throw in the sheriff's face when words failed. She set her phone up on a windowsill at dawn, pointing toward the church. Just a test. Just one more attempt to make sense of what Amos had been doing. What she captured was worse than anything she imagined. The footage started like the others. Early morning fog blanketing the field, dew glistening on the grass. Amos limped out from the tree line, slow but deliberate, heading straight for the basement door. But this time, he didn't scream. He listened. The goat stopped 10 feet away and stood still, ears twitching like antennae. Then, low in the mix, just barely audible beneath the wind, came something else. Thump. Pause. Thump. Thump. A rhythm. And then a voice. Garbled. Wet. Faint. Like it was being dragged through 12 feet of stone. But there. Please. Followed by coughing. Something choking. Tessa watched it twice before her hands started shaking. She woke Jesse, dressed him, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. No appointment, no small talk. This time, Dunley didn't hesitate. The warrant came through on a Tuesday. It was a cloudy, dead-colored morning, the sky pressed low like a lid waiting to seal something in. Tessa stood by the fence as a marked cruiser pulled up in front of the church, followed by an unmarked county SUV. Sheriff Dunley stepped out, flanked by Deputy Wallace, and marched up the gravel path like a man with nails in his boots. Pastor Gerald met them on the porch, dressed neatly in gray slacks and a navy cardigan. His Bible, as always, was tucked under one arm. Dunley didn't wait for pleasantries. He held up the paper. "By order of the county court, we're entering the basement, now." Gerald looked at the document, then at Tessa, who stood in the distance, arms crossed tight. He nodded once, calm, resigned. "Let me fetch the key." He stepped back inside. The door clicked shut behind him. 3 minutes passed, then 4. Deputy Wallace looked to Dunley. "You want me to?" But just then, the door opened again. Gerald reappeared with a tarnished ring of keys in his hand. His expression was unreadable. "No tricks," he said softly, handing them over. "The Lord sees everything." The key fit the lock, but the door resisted. It groaned open on rusted hinges, revealing a steep concrete stairwell, dust caked in the corners, spiderwebs like threads of forgotten time. The air wafting up was cold, not basement cold, but something older, sealed, waiting. Wallace clicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dark like a scalpel. They descended slowly. Each footstep echoed twice. At the bottom was a cluttered space, boxes of hymnals, broken chairs, stacks of water-damaged choir books. A rusty furnace squatted in the corner like it was afraid to be noticed. But it was the wall across from the staircase that caught Dunley's eye. It looked wrong. Piled high with chopped firewood, tarps, and 2 mismatched mannequins in choir robes, the corner seemed deliberately obscured. Not a storage accident. A barricade. Wallace moved forward, pulled the robes down. Dunley dragged the firewood aside. Behind it all, paneling. Newer than the rest of the wall. Nailed in tight. "Get the crowbar," Dunley muttered. It took 5 minutes. When the final plank was yanked free, dust billowed outward, choking and dry. Behind it sat something even more out of place. Steel, a heavy industrial-grade door with a triple-lock bolt. It didn't belong in a church basement. It belonged in a bunker, a prison. "Jesus Christ," Wallace whispered. Tessa, standing outside with Jesse, saw none of it. Only the moment when Dunley reappeared in the doorway, pale as chalk, radio in hand, calling in backup. Behind him, Gerald stood on the steps, still calm, still silent. Watching them all like he was waiting to see who would open it first. The steel door opened with a sound that didn't belong in any place of worship. A groan layered with finality, like something ancient exhaling its last breath. Inside, the room was small, no more than 12 feet by 10, but it was enough. The walls were concrete, smooth but water-stained, and lined with foam insulation. There was no window, no vent, no exit, but the door they'd just forced open. The first thing Dunley saw was the mattress, threadbare, yellowing, stained. In its center was a human form, curled tight, as if whoever lay there had been trying to fold themselves into nothingness. Only bones remained, long decayed, joints twisted inward. Near the far wall, under a single dim bulb, was a child's backpack, pink with faded unicorn stickers. A pair of small sneakers sat beside it, laces still tied. Deputy Wallace turned and vomited into his sleeve. The silence that followed was unbearable. No one spoke, not even Pastor Gerald, who stood just outside the threshold, arms at his sides like he'd been crucified upright. When they finally moved, they did it like men carrying a dream that had gone sour, slow, reluctant, and afraid of waking something worse. It took the forensics team 30 minutes to recover the remains. It took Gerald 7 words to destroy what little innocence Pine Hollow had left. They were broken before they got here. No one asked who they were. No one wanted to hear more. He said it without emotion, like a line from a dusty sermon. Then he sat on the chapel steps and closed his eyes, as if waiting for a hymn that would never come. By evening, the story had bled through every phone line, gas station, and kitchen in the county. Gerald Moore, beloved pastor, widower, pillar of Pine Hollow for 22 years, had been hiding a grave in his own church, a grave he'd built with care, with purpose. 3 missing children, 1 confirmed through dental records, 1 through the shoes her mother never stopped describing on missing posters, the 3rd not yet identified. Each child had disappeared from a different town, all within driving distance, all in the same age range, 8 to 11, all labeled runaways at the time. But the bones told a different story. Tessa didn't cry when she heard. She couldn't. Not until she walked into the field the next morning and found Amos lying in the grass, cold as stone. He was on his side, eyes open, body stiff, but there was no struggle, no violence. He had died facing the church, still, faithful, as if the last of his life had been poured out in vigil. She dropped to her knees, hands shaking as she touched his fur. His body was still intact, still heavy with presence, but something sacred had gone out of him. She buried him that afternoon near the tree line. Jesse helped dig, small hands gripping the shovel like it was a sword. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. When the sun set, casting the chapel in shadow, Tessa looked back one last time. The doors to the basement were boarded up, sealed with police tape, but she could still feel what had been beneath them. The echo of cries the town hadn't heard, the prayers that had never been answered, and the goat who had known. Not instinct, not noise, recognition. He had seen past the walls, past the sermons, past the kind eyes of a monster in shepherd's clothing. And when no one else had listened, he stayed, staring,